Welcome to Breakfast Central, the final episode for the week. Thank you so much for joining us all through the week. It's been a very long week of several conversations making the headlines. And yesterday, in a landmark decision, the court has affirmed the local government autonomy. Now, this judgment has elicited different reactions. There's some who are in support of it and some who have spoken strongly against it. And that'll be one of the core of our conversations today. Some of the arguments against it would be that it takes away from the definition of what true federalism ought to be. And for those who are in support of it, it would be said that they're in support of it because it would cost the balance that is needed and, sort of give it the autonomy that it needs to be able to do its functions. We've seen several ex-governors speaking about it, one of which is the former governor of Delta State, James Onanefe-Ibori. We've also seen the Speaker of the House speak about it as well. And we're going to x-ray these conversations. Now, over the course of the week, a lot of big stories made the headlines in the political space, as well as on social media, one of which is the alleged case of cyberbullying for and against Tony Abraham. And this is one of the conversations that we had yesterday. We're going to be highlighting some of the big stories we've looked at this week and share with you what our top stories are. But once again, we say thank you so much for joining us, and you can join the conversation on Twitter and on X and all social media platforms at News Central TV. I am Olive MOD, and I won't be doing this alone. I'm joined by Adebola Adedugba, who brings us breakfast headlines. Good morning, Adebola. I'm sure you certainly heard about the landmark judgment yesterday where the court has affirmed the autonomy of the local governments. How did that come across to you?
Good morning, Olive. It's a big one for Nigeria. I mean, well celebrated, a decision by the court. We're looking forward to this, like you rightly referenced, giving autonomy to the local government. We've seen cases in time past whereby, monies allocated, federal government allocations for local governments are siphoned in the coffers of the state, So we're hoping this would be a big win for local governments to have funds to function and to give that sort of independence for the local government. But then we've seen arguments that this may just be a sequence whereby federal government allocations to local governments, even though the verdict of the court is that they have the allocations financially, they have independent, they have the autonomy financially. It might just be a sequence whereby they would have to pay back this money to the state governments just to be in their good books. But we'll see how that plays out. Happy for the court decision, and going forward, hopefully, we hope the local government indeed would have financial autonomy. So it's a big one for Nigeria. It's a step in the right direction.
Well, I mean, you have said it's a big win. Some wouldn't consider it a win, but there's so many things that have happened over the course of the week, Adebola. I'm sure you saw the bickering and the argument between the House of Reps and the Minister of Women Affairs, a video that has made its rounds on social media, and some would find embarrassing. Some have accused the House of Representatives of badgering ministers or badgering politicians, just basically laying allegations on them without having done their due diligence. On the other hand, the minister has been accused of diversion of funds, and the sums we're seeing, they're not small numbers here, regardless of whether they're small numbers or big numbers. Again, it reflects, the reactions on social media reflects the trust deficit that we're seeing in our country with regards to how, people expect that once you hear any negative news about politicians, you run with it. So it's not been the most exciting time. She's come under a lot of criticism, and investigations will be carried out. She's denied all allegations of wrongdoing, and there'll be further investigation being carried out. But also on the side, Adebola, there's another story I did see. It was talking about how there's a bill to create 74 extra seats at the National Assembly for women. And this bill has scaled through the second reading. Of course, arguments for and arguments against this bill has emerged. But one thing that, is particular about this, I mean, we saw with the last administration, about 5 gender bills were kicked out. And now it seems that a number of these bills will be represented to the current assembly. And maybe there'll be an opportunity for more women or a chance for more women to participate in governance. Whilst those who argue for this bill would say that it's an opportunity for more women to participate in governance, those who argue against it would say that the bill in itself takes away from what gender equality should be, that they should be allowed to compete, that it takes away the competition and the competitiveness, that they should be allowed to compete based on the fact that there's merit as opposed to the fact that they're women. So I've seen different sides to the divide. And I wonder, what your thoughts are. Are you in support of it? Are you in support of extra 74 seats at the Assembly?
It's no longer gender equality, it's gender equity. And so for the House of, we saw in the 9th Assembly how a similar bill like this, to have more women representatives in the House.
35% affirmative action.
Yes, I mean, support for it. I feel the women, to have something to bring to the table as equal as the men. I just believe they should have the chance to prove their mettle. If for nothing, I feel women are very passionate, and when they put their hearts to a task, trust me, Olive, they go all the way. So I'm fully in support of having more women in their House of Assembly, and then just to see what they can bring to the table in terms of shaping policies and driving also that, change.
That'll be a conversation I'll probably explore in the coming week to see, what side of the divide will bring experts who are for and against it and argue. Of course, another of the arguments I've seen against it would be that we're looking to crunch down on our spending as opposed to expanding more. So creating more seats would be, of course, more money. There'd be more budgets in that regard, and where lies your Sorry report. There's so many conversations to explore at Ebola, and we'll be looking at these conversations through the course of today's show.
Hello and welcome to Breakfast Headlines. I am Adebola Adeduba. Let's begin with news in Nigeria, where the closed-door meeting between President Bola Ahmed Tinubu and Labour leaders on Thursday has ended in deadlock. President of the Nigerian Labour Congress, Comrade Joe Ajero, has said the status quo on 250,000 naira as minimum wage stands, while the federal government and organized private sector agreed on 62,000 naira. President Bola Tinubu has said he needs time to consult with stakeholders before sending the bill for the new minimum wage to the National Assembly. The Supreme Court has affirmed the financial autonomy of Nigeria's 774 local governments. In its judgment on Thursday, a 7-member panel of the court unanimously upheld a suit brought by the federal government to strengthen the independence of local governments in the country. A member of the panel, Emmanuel Ajim, who delivered the court's lead judgment, held that the local governments across the country should, from Thursday, receive their allocations directly from the Accountant General of the Federation. Meanwhile, a former governor of Delta State, James Ibori, has faulted the Supreme Court's judgment on local government autonomy. According to Ibori, the Supreme Court's ruling undermines the principle of federalism as outlined in Section 162, Subsection 3 of the 1999 Constitution, which mandates the distribution of funds from the Federation accounts among federal, state, and local governments. It adds that Section 6 requires states to maintain a state joint local government account for these allocations. Let's head to Burkina Faso, where the military junta said it has adopted a draft of an amended family code that criminalizes homosexuality. The West African nation has been among just 22 out of 54 countries on the continent that allow same-sex relations, which are punishable by death or lengthy prison terms in some states. Burkina Faso has been under military rule since 2 successive coups in 2022 and is part of a confederation with juntas in neighboring Mali and Niger. The law is to pass the parliamentary vote and then be promulgated by Traoré. In East Africa, Kenya's President William Ruto has dismissed most of his cabinet after deadly protests against his plan to raise more than $2 billion in new taxes. In an address to the nation on Thursday, Ruto retained his deputy and prime cabinet secretary. The move comes after he scrapped the plan to levy duties on everything from bread to diapers, following protests that left at least 41 people dead. In Central Africa, DR Congo is said to have detected at least 25 mpox cases in Goma. Health authorities said at least 25 cases of dangerous new strain of mpox spreading through DR Congo have been detected in the eastern city of Goma, mostly in camps housing people fleeing a surrounding conflict. Mpox, formerly called monkeypox, is a viral infection and can be deadly. DR Congo has seen 20,000 cases and more than 1,000 deaths from mpox, mainly among children, since the start of 2023. Authorities recently approved the use of vaccines to tackle the upsurge, but none are currently available outside of clinical trials in the country. And that's all on Breakfast Headlines. It's back to Olive.
Thank you very much, Adebola, for bringing us the breakfast headlines. Whilst they're dealing with Mpox, we are dealing with cholera here. Also a reflection of the fact that we need to do a lot more research and investment in our healthcare. I mean, for us here with cholera, it's a reflection. In some cases, they will tell you that it's a reflection of the dire situation we find ourselves in terms of how cholera is a poverty-triggered disease. But let's move away from the health conversations and look at I would have said we should talk about the local government, but that's another story that we'll look at when we get into the show proper. But looking at the minimum wage conversations, is it not exhausting that we're still on this? And right now it does seem that there isn't any headway. The meeting has ended in a deadlock. Many would argue that Labour lost the steam the moment they called off the strike. When they had that strike, shut down what was referred to as economic sabotage, when they shut down the national grid and they had the attention of the government. Many argue that at that point was the point when they ought to have been firm with their demands, because the moment they agreed to go back and reconvene with the government and come back in another 5 days, that they had totally lost steam and nothing was going to happen. So are you surprised, Adebola, that we are still on the conversation about minimum wage, whilst the organized labor is insisting on 250,000 naira minimum wage, the government is still insisting on 62,000 naira. So are you surprised about how long it's taken? And are you also of the opinion that they also maybe lost steam after they called off the strike?
Well, I mean, it beats one's imagination as to why there is this delay in decision-making or reaching a consensus. Yes, Labour has met with the government, stakeholders of the government, also organized private sector, I understand. And that meeting, like you rightly captured, ended in an impasse. We're looking forward to next week when they would have another meeting. But I'm wondering why, the prolonged meetings they are having. The government has, there is a restriction on tax on importation of essential food items for 150 days. So while all of those reforms or interventions are going on, I'm wondering why, when it comes to the minimum wage, we are very slow-paced as to coming to an agreement or reaching the consensus. Labour has given a proposal of 250,000. The government is still, kind of bent on 62,000 naira. I just believe we need to move forward. They need to reach an agreement once and for all so the country can move forward. Because, hey, people are depending on this minimum wage to determine different other prices of goods and services, or how they shape their life, or how they even budget or plan their lives. So I just feel, it's high time. Governments, Labour, organized private sector, trade congress, unions should all agree on a workable minimum wage for Nigerians, and then we'll move past that stage. We have lots of issues to tackle, and so the question of minimum wage should be dealt with once and for all.
All right. Yeah. I'm hoping that we can get to a finality because it's taking too long, right? While some would argue that now is probably not the time. We have Mr. Sheson Kwade, who's an analyst on the show, that would oftentimes argue that he doesn't see the move of Labour trying to argue for an increase in minimum wage as the project that they should undertake, that rather they should undertake on policies. They should undertake pushing the government to make policies that would increase the quality of life, because if they increase the minimum wage, they're spending this money still on exorbitant exorbitant bills for healthcare, for feeding and transport and the likes. But the perspective that I had seen in a number of conversations would be, all of them can work simultaneously. You can push for better policies to improve the quality of life for Nigerians, and at the same time, push for better funding, push for an increase in salaries. And I'm hoping that the government and the organized labor can come to a meeting ground. We don't want to find ourselves boxed into a corner. We saw what happened in Kenya.
Well, I was going to that. Kenya is, it's a big topic.
Exactly. We all saw what's happening in Kenya right now. It does seem like President William Ruto's hands are tied. He's been pushed to a corner, and we've seen that he's now had to fire his cabinet members, something that he probably wouldn't have done if the unfortunate outcome, the lives had to be lost. People had to protest. Men would ask, did you need for all this to happen for you to implement the change that the people wanted? Did you need for lives to be lost for you to listen to the people and to make the people feel heard? These are some of the things that many people are asking, and we'll talk about Kenya much later today as the president has fired members of his cabinet.
Just to touch on what she said about, beyond reviewing the minimum wage, There are questions as to, we have escalating prices of goods and services. The indices driving high costs of living in Nigeria need to be addressed beyond just topping up what the minimum wage is. If we don't adjust that part, we're going to keep having the conversation about increasing our minimum wage. Why are we having inflation? Why do we have skyrocketing prices of goods and services? What happens to importation, exportation for Nigeria? I mean, revenues to make more money to help drive down inflation in the country. Refineries, what's happening to our refineries? We have 4 moribund. Why can't we get them functional? So all of these things can work together in the economy and ensure we are, we have a very financially secured economy. And then conversations of minimum wage would work alongside other factors in the economy. Like you rightly captured, Olive, look at what is happening in Kenya. I mean, the finance bill was the last straw that broke the camel's back. Kenya has been through a series of inflation, unemployment, corruption in government. But the Gen Z rose up and then they began to protest and fought the government to ensure the government listen to them. And look at what William Ruto is doing right now. He was forced to have a meeting on X Space by the Gen Zs who moderated the session. Right. And they gave demands of what they want. Now the question is, yes, William Ruto, amongst the demands given by the Gen Z, is that bloated cabinets, which William Ruto has dismissed now, but also we have questions as to if indeed the Gen Z or what William Ruto has done will appease or quell tensions in Kenya. Not to forget, they are still calling for him to resign, to leave office.
I guess we're just going to have to eventually wait to see how things will turn out in Kenya with the calls for the resignation. But the impact of the protest was definitely felt. One day it will be interesting for us to have a conversation and do a comparative analysis of the Kenya Gen Z protest vis-a-vis the NSAS protests that happened in Nigeria, and why both of them have had some form of they had completely different results if you ask a number of Nigerians. But Adebola, thank you for joining us. We'll see you again at 9 a.m.
You're welcome.
Breakfast Headlines. See you around. Welcome back to Breakfast Central. Diverse reactions have trailed the recent Supreme Court's judgment, which granted full financial autonomy to the local government areas in the country. The judgment, instituted against state governments by the federal government, now empowers direct payment of monthly allocations into the accounts of local government councils, a deviation from the joint account procedure practiced in the past and empowered by the Constitution. News Central's Marvelous Obomanu has more details.
The judgment by the Supreme Court has brought an end to several decades-long controversy over the funding of local government areas, especially in the light of releases from the Federation account. The court ruled that payment by the Federation Allocation Accounts Committee should henceforth be paid directly to local government accounts, a deviation from the previous joint accounts payment as prescribed by the Constitution. While this has been abused in the past by state governors, many say the judgment will make the local governments more effective and empower them to bring development to the grassroots.
Democracy cannot be entrenched in all the 774 local governments in Nigeria. Our people cannot see rapid development. So we just want to thank God Almighty for giving us a president like Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who has had the courage to take this step by coming to the proper place to say, let the proper interpretation be made to give life to the third tier. Enough of the intimidation by forces who do not want democracy to exist in Nigeria.
The Lordship came to a conclusion that money due to local government shall henceforth be paid directly from the Federation account to the 774 local government and 6 municipal council in Abuja.
Today's judgment is historic and iconic judgment that has restored grassroots democracy, which our emperor governors had dampened for the last 25 years.
Counsels to the governors say they will study the judgment and decide on the next course of action. However, others urge the governors to abide by the judgment.
We'll get the certified true copy of the judgment as a body. The body of State Attorneys General of the Federation will study it and then we'll come up with our statement on it.
The judgment also raises concerns on the fate of local development councils created by state governments, especially relating to their funding.
Are there creations of the Constitution? If they are not included in the 774 local government and 6 councils in Abuja.
With local governments now given a free rein to determine the course of development in their areas, citizens have been tasked to be more vigilant and hold them accountable to ensure the proficient management of their funds.
20.6% of federal allocation will be useful in transforming our communities. Other will be needed in the supplement from the states and the federal government. But if we allow the 20.6% federal allocation to go down the drain, as the governors have done, then it will make this judgment meaningless.
The judgment changes the political calculations in many states, as there will be no more excuses for local governments to deny citizens at the grassroots good governance. In Abuja for News Central, Marvelous Obonman.
It really has been a long road to this point. Yesterday, the Supreme Court gave financial autonomy to the local governments, as we've just seen in that report by Marvelous Obonman. The court ruled that it is unconstitutional for state governors to control funds allocated to local government administrations, declaring that the 774 local government councils should manage their own funds. In what seems like a subtle reference to a recent development in Rivers State, the court emphasized the need for the separation of powers between the federal, state, and local governments, and stated that the state governments lack the authority to appoint caretaker committees or recognize any local government council that is not democratically elected, noting that democratically elected local governments are essential and non-negotiable. This morning, to discuss this even further, we're joined by the Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Sam Kagbo, and Director Community Engagement of Code, Kingsley Agu. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning.
Good morning. And thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. I think I'll begin with Leonard SCN. I don't know if you've been able to get your hand on the certified true copy of the judgment yet. I would like you to please run us through, what you say are the highlights of this judgment for you, before we then start to ask which side of the divide that either of you are on.
No, the judgment was just yesterday, but I think I have an idea of the course of action and the issues that were canvassed by both parties. When I say both parties, the Attorney General on the one side and the attorneys of the 36 states of the Federation. Here was the case of the Attorney General. The case was that the Supreme Court should interpret the provisions of Section 7 of the Constitution and see whether or not the failure of the states to establish democratically elected does not give the Federation, that is the principal of the Attorney General, the power to withhold funds of local councils that were not or have not been elected democratically. That was the main issue. Although so many other reliefs were asked for, but basically the suspicion of the Attorney Generals of the state was that that was actually the goal, which is to say that the federal government should be given the power to withhold funds of the states where local governments were not democratically elected. When I say funds of the states, funds that are supposed to go to the local councils under Section 162 of the Constitution.
All right.
The average of the states' attorney generals was that the issue that is, the subject matter was not one that was envisaged by Section 231 of the Constitution, and that the Attorney General had no local standing. That is, assuming there was any dispute at local councils and their respective state. It wasn't the business of the Attorney General to actually litigate that.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, so I think you've highlighted and you've captured majority of what the issue was. Of course, the state governors were not having it, even though some were having it. What we're seeing is that there's been diverse reactions. We've seen Governor Fintiri, who said that he threw his full weight behind the local government autonomy. We've also seen a number of other governors who have spoken up against it. And yesterday, after the judgment, former governor of Delta State, Governor James Onanefe-Ibori, spoke strongly against it. We'll get into the details of that later, saying that it takes away from what the definition of, or the true picture of federalism is, even though he highlighted that he's not in support of the funds not being administered properly. But if we're looking at the constitutional provision, that it takes away from what federalism is. So I think before we get into details of it, which side of the divide are you on, Leonard Essien? Let's find out what sides my two guests today are on. Are you for it? Are you against it?
Well, I would straight away say that yes, the judgment by itself was pragmatic, and it was only because the Supreme Court was a court of final instance, and that is a constitutional government. It's a constitutional court and also a policy court. Beyond that, it's a judgment that is difficult to reconcile with the provisions of the Constitution as they are in their dry letters, and also the precedent, that is the previous judgment of the Supreme Court itself regarding its own original jurisdiction as expressed in Section 231 of the 132 of the Constitution. I'm sorry. But like I have said, most of us are gonna.
Leonard Essien, your audio has been disconnected. I'm hoping that we can have that sorted. But whilst we're fixing out your audio, let's bring Sam Kagbo into the conversation. Kingsley Agbo, I beg your pardon. Kingsley Agbo, you're the community engagement leader of CODE. What would you say your side of the divide is? Are you in support of this? And I'm asking because I know you deal with the grassroots. So let's find out what your side of the divide is before I go into the next question about what is currently practicable.
Okay, I think it's obvious you would know my side of the divide. Of course, I'm always for the people. The people want more resources that gets down to the grassroots. Local government autonomy, especially when it comes to managing the resources, looks like a system that would deliver that. So, of course, I'm 100% for local government autonomy.
All right, so talk to us exactly. Now, I knew you were going to be in support of it, but I just wanted, to give you the permission to express your position. But with what we're seeing so far, how would you say that local government have fared in terms of access to doing the duties, carrying out projects they need to carry? How would you say they have fared in terms of access to funding from the state government?
So no matter how beautiful or lofty the ideas of local government to develop their location or their locality, it all boils down to the amount of resources available to them to be able to carry out that task. And what it means is that you would see little or no presence of the local government when you look at the 774 local government across board. You always see that overlapping functionality between the state and the local government. For example, the Constitution provides that local government should be responsible for the clearing of refuse and also collection of funds as regards that. But what you find in most states is that the state has actually taken over such kind of function. So you want to talk about even collection of rates such as local government, radio ground rents or television rates. It's actually the function of local government. But you have the state collecting these funds and with the guys that they will distribute back to the state, which is not always the case. Now let's even talk about is the local government even positioned well to be able to do that? as of June 13th, 2024, Vanguard newspaper puts it as over 58% of states of 58% of local government councils do not have elected officials. So what this means is that you have the governor's guys being appointed as caretaker committees, which means that you can't find development that are specific to the people, rather development that are in tune with what the government wants. It's not the first time we're talking about local government autonomy. In fact, we started in 2008 when it was first introduced, and then it wasn't successful. President Buhari's government tried to also bring it, wasn't also successful, and now you have the President Tinubu's government being able to get this landmark judgment. And for me, it's a landmark development, and civil society organization needs to rally around the 774 local government immediately to ensure that their fiscal structures are in place, right from budget development to budget implementation, and above all, budget transparency. I want to see inclusiveness in the development and implementation of those budgetary provisions. If you look at the January releases for FAC, looking at the sharing formula of 20.6%, the local government got as much as 278.041 billion naira. That was just in January. If you look at the figures for February, March, May, you see that that's a lot of money. And from January till date, over 1 trillion naira has been shared to the local government.
All right.
Does it look like a location where over 1 trillion naira has been spent? I guess the answer is a big no.
Kingsley, we'll come back to you. We'll come back to you to talk about what the next steps are, especially because there are some who would argue that it's one thing for the local government to get their funds directly, and it's another thing for them to then implement the projects that they've been earmarked for. But let's get back to Leonard Essay, and I'm hoping that the audio is connected. Tolulope Adeleru Balogun joins us in this conversation. And Leonard Essay, and I'll have you just react to a statement by the former governor of Delta State who says that is an assault on federalism. He made reference to section 162 of the Constitution, which I am going to read out. In interpreting, he said, section 162 subsection 3 of the 1999 Constitution as amended. He said this section expressly provides thus: any amount standing to the credit of the Federation account shall be distributed among the federal and state governments and the local government councils in each state on such terms and in such manner as may be prescribed by the National Assembly. He provides further, he goes further to talk about section 6, which says, each state shall maintain a special account to be called State Joint Local Government Account, into which shall be paid all allocations to the local government councils of the state from the Federation account and the government of the state. So he's saying that the concept of this and the court's ruling is an assault on true federalism, and he's also hoping that the judgment delivered today will be reviewed at the earliest possible time. Leonard Essay, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, I will start by saying it may not be reviewed. Of course, what he has said is not new. If you read almost all of the briefs and the preliminary objections of the 36 states attorney general, that was exactly what they expressed. But the issue is this: federalism is not just a political issue. It's also an economic and a functional, structural issue. The local government councils, not one, not two, not 10, very many of them had judgments against their respective states concerning this issue of autonomy. And there has been several attempts to amend that particular section that is relying on, that is section 162, especially subsection 3 to 6. But all efforts have always been ending at the state assembly, state houses of assemblies, because every constitutional amendment has to have what? The concurrence of 3/4 of the state houses of assembly. So this particular judgment, like I have said, in terms of policy, in terms of constitutionality, as a court of final instance, I would say it is laudable, and if you ask me, it is in tandem with what? Constitutionality and the federal system of government that Nigeria is practicing. There is actually nothing, absolutely nothing wrong with the judgment in that respect. For us as lawyers who are actually precedent-driven, like I have said, we find it difficult to reconcile with the earlier judgment. But the court can always, by itself, sift and modify the Constitution as long as it's doing so proactively to satisfy the sentiment and the inclination of the people.
All right, Mr. Caldwell, thank you so much for that. And I think former governor of Abia State, Orji Uzor Kalu, is one of those who actually has agreed with the Supreme Court judgment. But I want us to move a little bit further. And Kingsley Agu did mention, of course, how much money has come into local government or was allocated. So in the first 5 months of the year, it's been over 1.6 trillion that has been allocated for local governments in Nigeria. But as he also said, we have so many areas in this country that are not local governments. There are LCDAs. There are situations where there are caretaker committees. And I want to look at the implications of this judgment for that situation as well. So, Mr. Caldwell, I'll start with you. What are the implications when it comes to that? Because you have all these caretaker committees, which means the people did not vote for these individuals who are, quote unquote, caretaking their area. Then we also have the LCDA. Lagos is a prime example. We only have about 20 local governments here, and I think about 33 LCDAs. What are the implications of this judgment on that existing situation as it is?
Well, I would say the devil is in the details. The Supreme Court has made it very clear in the case of Lagos State that DAs are not recognized by the Constitution. So what the case was about the 7 local government councils. Monies will be released to the local government council as they are recognized by the Constitution. For those who have split themselves into some subsectoral delineations, they would have to deal with that. But I do not think that there is any issue that or any reason why we should be bothered with that, because rightly, as the Constitution, as the Supreme Court has said, the Constitution is very clear as to the local government councils that are recognized. They are all spelled out, listed in the Constitution, and for every state, against every state, the Constitution clearly spells out the recognized local government councils.
So, Kingsley, I'll follow up with you on that question. So, Mr. Caldwell is telling us they're clearly spelled out, but what we know is that the governors in some way or form have been flouting what has been clearly spelled out. So when we look at this in terms of the implications with LCDAs, that's one part I want you to answer. But also second, when we look at elections and the ability of lesser known parties, smaller parties at this point in time to start taking LGAs and not having and being able to run them representing their party, are we looking at a place where this kind of judgment is able to also deepen our democracy because it's allowing more opposition and more competition even for the will of the people, for the vote of the people?
Okay, let me start from the part of the LCDAs. So the Constitution is actually very clear. We have 774 local governments in Nigeria. And states are not at will to create new local government structures. In fact, for you to be able to create local government structures, it's the National Assembly that actually has that right to be able to do that. So if as a state you decide to, as the SN mentioned, to create a local government, the Constitution does not recognize that. Back to your question on how the states are doing currently in terms of will you have more smaller parties taking over local government elections. So what this judgment has done is that it has given more independence to the local governments. Because if you look at most of the states where local government elections has happened, it's largely parties of the governor that eventually wins those locations. Most of the states. It's just a few states where you find opposition taking 1 or 2 seats in those localities. And if you're looking at that, it means one of the disincentives, or that why people are not so much interested in that local government election, is the fact that at the end of the day, you're just an appendage of the governor. But now with this autonomy coming in, you would have people springing up that would focus on smaller areas like the local government are structured, campaign, get the buy-in of the people and be able to get development. And it's also good for the people of the local government, because what it means is that they know they can now decide their future and be able to vote, get resources for development, and ensure their local government representative are able to do that. And I think we've talked so much about the local government chairman and the rest, but what we're forgetting is that the local government structure also has what we call the councillors. So the councillors are like the lawmakers of the local government. It means even the councillors at the ward level will be strengthened, because it's no longer a tea party, because you need to put an eye on the resources that are coming directly to the state. So I think it's a win-win for everyone. And also, I know I'm not a legal luminary, but then if my layman knowledge pays me well or works very well, I think the Constitution is a living document. And there's a reason why they call Supreme Court a constitutional court, meaning in instances where they need to step in and interpret the Constitution or take a position on the interpretation of the law, they would have to step in. And that is the reason why they have taken this judgment. And I think it's a landmark judgment.
Speaking of this, okay, go ahead.
Reason why, just one more point,
Okay.
The reason why the federal government in the first place took the state governors to court is because of the misappropriation of that fund.
Yeah.
The Constitution said you would owe that money in trust, but then you're also supposed to transfer the same to the local government. But that is not being done. And that is the reason why the president or the federal government felt there's a need to get this fund directly to the local government, looking at the fact that so-called joint account has been so much bastardized to the fact that it's just another account that owes the state government funds. That's
All
what
right.
it has eventually become.
I have
So
a
that's the
follow-up.
reason why the federal government had to approach the Supreme Court to be able to interpret the Constitution in the favor of the local government as
All right.
it is
We're trying to make the best use of time. So as quickly as possible, please, I'd like you to react to this. The question would be, because there are a number of people who say, yes, whilst this is a landmark judgment and they're in support of it, there are concerns about the administration of these funds released to the local government. Do you have such fears? And how can we ensure that we demand accountability from the local government going forward? And this is for Mr. Kingsley Agu, of course.
Absolutely, I actually expressed that fear. Because if you look at what is already being obtained at the state level, where you have gross misappropriation ongoing, and you can't necessarily match the amount of funds that comes in from the federation account to the state and the development that's on ground, there's a need to worry about the kind of structure that local government would have. But yes, the opportunity here. It's an opportunity for citizens in that locality or residents in that locality to be able to rally around and start putting in structures. For us at Connected Development, we'll continue with our engagement on the Rebuilding Trust campaign, where we are trying to link citizens back to government and ensure that government are as inclusive as possible. It's an opportunity also to be able to set up the fiscal structure of this state, right from their budget office to the implementation office, most importantly, their monitoring and evaluation office. And there's also a need, a double need for the federating unit using its instrument, this time around the EFCC, to now start paying closer attention to these local government funds, and let's see how it goes from here. It's important we state it's not Uhuru as it is right now. It doesn't mean because local government has more funds now that development will happen automatically. No. If we don't put in the right structure administratively, which for us, Connected Development will be on, we started a conversation in Kaduna, we're extending it to across the entire country, we might also face the same issue of lack of development despite funds coming in to the local government.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. Thank you, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Sam Karbo, and of course, the Director of Community Engagement at Code, Kingsley Agu, for joining us on this conversation. It's one that continues to develop, and we'll see more opinions and more probably interest in whichever direction in the coming days as well. But the Supreme Court, the highest court in Nigeria, has decided, and this is what we go forward with. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
you very much.
Fantastic.
And that last question you put to Kings, I think is very important because we don't want to see a replication of what's happening at the state level,
exactly.
at the local government level. And the truth is many local government chairmen, councillors have imbibed some of the spirits and some of the activities of our governors.
You know what's
when it
even
comes to these
interesting?
funds.
I saw a tweet on X, and the person said, even after this judgment has been passed, that when some of them get their funds, they will still say, His Excellency, I've gotten the money, what should I do?
And
as funny as it is true.
Especially at the party level, and as I'm not sure if it's Mr. Carbo that said it, that a lot of the local government chairmen, they end up being appendages of the governor, and it becomes a party activity. So I'm really looking forward to this in terms of, this is 2024, we have 2027 coming. It's an opportunity for parties to also focus. We tend to tell smaller parties that, why don't you start at the lower levels?
Yes.
I think this also gives us a better playing field for some of them to start at the local levels. Let's see what other parties can do in administering and taking care of local government areas.
Another conversation that I've seen come up in certain quarters would be that maybe it's time to then ensure that we start looking at INEC possibly conducting the local government elections as opposed to the state governments, because now with what we then see is there's so many elections that are now off cycle. See in Rivers State, for example, they didn't have elections. Governor had to put in caretaker committee. I don't even know what the implication of this judgment will be in Rivers State, especially with Martin Zamewule being reinstated, him and the other lawmakers, and it's just a lot of drama that's
Isn't that deadline, isn't that 7-day deadline up already?
It's almost up. I think it should be up by...
I was hearing some calculations that the deadline might be up, and
I think it should be up by the end of the week.
We're going to really be focusing on. Thank you so much, Olive.
Absolutely.
Right. So we're moving on to other things which take us to East Africa now. The voice of the people prevails. I would want to say a luta continua. Anyway, following escalating protests, which expanded into nationwide movements against his administration and resulted in 39 fatalities, President William Ruto of Kenya has dissolved his cabinet, with the exception of the prime cabinet secretary and foreign minister, as well as his vice president. Now, the move comes after Ruto abandoned the controversial finance bill and announced spending cuts.
Ruto has pledged to engage in consultations, to form a broad-based government and develop radical programs to tackle Kenya's debt burden, create jobs, and combat corruption. Now, if you recall, his administration has come under fire. A number of his ministers were, they had a lot of controversy surrounding them. A number of them will be the health sector mismanagement accusation for Susan Nakumicha, who was the health cabinet secretary. We also have Ezekiel Machogu. He had allegations of nepotism in education. Moses Kuria, ethical questions. He came under scrutiny for allegations of unethical business dealings during his tenure in the trade docket. He was subsequently demoted to a less lucrative portfolio. There's also Kipchumba Murkomen, who had opulence and underperformance in transport. In fact, that was one of the most interesting ones. Opulence, which is what we see a number of times with politicians in Africa. Flamboyance life, you want to show off on social media, whereas the people that put you there to serve, the people who you're there to serve, are living in abject poverty, struggling to make ends meet, and you are showing an ostentatious display of wealth on social media.
And it's interesting to me because the young voters of Kenya are the ones who have been acknowledged as making sure that William Ruto became president. And when he announced this cabinet, some younger faces, some, not necessarily regular politicians and regular people within the corridors of power, people were happy about that. And now to see the same kind of things that the young voters were angry about with the previous administration, with several other administrations in Kenya, being repeated with William Ruto's administration has been something that has probably been like a stab at the heart for them.
It really is a stab in the heart because, like you said, William Ruto was that face of young people taking over governance. And I remember when we covered the elections, it was a relief to young people. And in some way, they even inspired the movement in Nigeria. Even a number of the obedience followed that. You would see that it inspired the movement to say, a younger person can take over office. And then all of a sudden, this young man who had had this seeming love for the struggling people in Kenya, founder of the Hustler Nation, recognized them, and then turns around to do the exact same things he was criticized for. I oftentimes wonder what Raila Odinga will be thinking, like where he is, even though, yes, he's still in a way working with the government, but it's just a very sad turn of events. But did they have to get to this point for all of this to happen?
And these
did they have to protest and the people have to die?
And these movements are very, very active, but unfortunately, he's lost a lot of trust from young Kenyans. And they're saying they're going to stay on the streets until they see a lot more. They're not absolutely satisfied. They don't completely trust the president to fully go through. They think a lot of the things he's announced right now are actually cosmetic in light of what's happening, and they want to see deeper reforms. I believe we do have the thoughts from the president of Kenya.
I have today, in line with the powers given to me by Article 1521 and 1525B of the Constitution and Sections 12 of the Office of the Attorney General's Act, decided to dismiss with immediate effect all the Cabinet Secretaries and Attorney General of the Republic of Kenya, of the Cabinet of Kenya, except the Prime Cabinet Secretary and Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs and Diaspora Affairs. And of course, the Office of the Deputy President is not affected in any way. I will immediately engage in extensive consultations across different sectors and political formations and other Kenyans, both in public and private, with the aim of setting up a broad-based government that will assist me in accelerating and expediting the necessary, urgent, and irreversible implementation of the program that we have, including other radical measures and programs.
So I know in the following days we'll continue to look at the situation in Kenya, and a lot more will be expected from the Kenyan president in the coming days. But up next, we have a recap for you.
Welcome back to Breakfast Central. This is the part where you get to be a part of the show by calling in to react to any of your stories or any stories you prefer to talk about on the front pages of the papers. And as we analyze the headlines today, we're joined by public affairs analyst Rasak Olokoba. Good morning and thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
All right, now let's get into the details of the paper. We're starting off with the Punch newspaper. On the front page of the Punch, local government funds is the big story. Federal government floors governors. The Supreme Court outlaws caretaker ESCO and joint accounts. Preventing democratically elected administration in local government unconstitutional, says the Supreme Court. Tinubu, NLC, NULGE, others hail judgment. Ex-Ogun local government chair, Lord's President. Federal government IOCs agree on crude supply to Dangote and local refineries. Public officials received 721 billion naira bribe in 2023, according to NBS report. Are you a public officer, sir? You are not. Okay, because they're saying that they received bribes, so I just want to be sure that you are not one of the public officials.
I don't work with government.
You don't? Okay, thank you for clarifying that. 33 billion naira fraud, ex-power minister collapses before trial, remanded in prison. That was very sad. It was very sad and shady, some people would say.
Has that script not been casted?
Yes, it just reminded me of, the one who collapsed as well.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen it happen in different places. It's just that when the one that now actually died, we then say, okay,
Absolutely.
maybe they actually didn't have health challenges. But we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. They'll have their day in court, and we hope he gets better. National Assembly decries unlawful detention of journalists. 2 journalists have been kidnapped. We must reiterate that the families are yet to, in fact, they were kidnapped with their wives and their children. One of the journalists' wives was left by the roadside because of her ill health, and nothing has been said yet. And we are asking security agencies, please, please, and please, as much as you can, do whatever you can to bring these people back and bring their families back, because it's not a good look.
And journalism is not a crime.
No, it's not. We saw protests, they're protesting about how they're trying to silence journalists. They're called the fourth estate of the realm for a reason. Yeah. Minimum wage, Tinubu Labour talks adjourn till next week. UK varsity reviews fees for Nigerian students facing expulsion. Lagos Marwa operator hangs self over tricycle seizure. My goodness.
We're going to move on to the Vanguard now and look at some of the headlines on the front pages. Bold there, executive order, drug makers seek clear timeline, stable naira for 70% production. And the writer has that maintain non-implementation, hampering companies placing order on importation of raw materials. Others say unless naira value is fixed, local drug manufacturing is a mirage. Going above at the top, we have Edo 2024. Obaseki inaugurates 20-man transition committee. Dangote Refinery, FG, producers agreed to supply crude, enhance domestic refinery. refining, that is. Inflation, we're suffering for ways and means loan. Cardoso, that's an interesting comment from him there. Now, the Supreme Court's verdict on LG autonomy, we've taken government in good faith, Governors Saludo and Otu. Alleged 33 billion naira fraud. He made it to this front page as well. Ex-Power Minister Maman slumps in courts before trial, but the EFCC still did serve him after he was resuscitated. What else do we have? Some sports for you from the Vanguard. Super Falcons camp swells as Kanu Hezua arrive. And what else? A cartoon there for you, but that takes you through the front page of the Vanguard.
All right, now let's quickly look at this Nigerian newspaper. On the front page of this Nigeria, free at last. Supreme Court grants local governments full autonomy to access funds directly, unshackled from suffocating grips of governors. This is also replicated in other papers. Akpabio Lawan disagree as Senate fixes 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. for plenary. Obi seeks legal redress over alleged suspension by PDP. NWC demands retraction. 33 billion naira fraud despite slumping, court remands ex-power minister in prison. Minimum wage considers 62,000 naira offer, president urges labor. FCCPC blames market cartels for high cost of foodstuffs. And that's all for now. We have one more paper.
And that's the Daily Independent.
All right, so we'll come back to that. Let's get into the details of the story. If we have more time, we'll take the Daily Independent. Let's have a conversation with The Punch.
Yeah.
Starting off with Mr. Rasako Lokoba, the big story everyone is talking about, local government autonomy. Arguments for and against. Which side of the divide are you on?
Well, let me, as an expert on this matter, I'm a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Public Administration and Local Government. Let me name the matter, then we'll choose the path we want to do. When Yorosi took the decision, appears to have taken decision for that political aberration that led us into what we are today. All Nigerians took part in it too. We should not blame Yorosi. Remember this day that every Nigerian seems to be happy with what has happened. But let's look at the complications. The first thing is that we are all talking about resource control. And resource control means that the state takes charge or whatever resources in their state. You don't relate with the federal government. With what portion of the resources should I give you? 10%, 20%? Now, the complication now is that when that succeeds eventually, then how do you handle resource control? Are you saying that 774 local governments will be talking to federal government about resources in their domain? That's a big challenge. You have to look at that. And that is why it is a problem. And we've been warning that when governors pilfer, that's accusation, funds meant for the local government, what you do is not to separate the local government from the state, because the local government is a component part of the state. There are ancestral issues that federal government does not have capacity to resolve. There's no model of this nature anywhere in the world. Though. America has about 10,000 local government. Federal government does not control their local government, too, which is called the Aburu. So, but we resolve issues with sentiment. That's number one. Number two is that we say that the federal government, the list is heavy. They must devolve power. You're adding local government with who is going to supervise 774 chairmen. In fact, there are states who are designing a model on how to sort it out. If your money is being mismanaged, the people in that local government, they want it to be mismanaged. That's why I've always said that it's a shared responsibility, governance. When public office holders do certain things and goes away free with it, what did you do as a people? There's no abracadabra or where government in the work is working. The end result is that people took part in it. People are assertive that you can't mismanage our fund in this manner. So when you reverse the trend, when state control their resources, they will design a model for their own local government, how they want it to work. That is how it's supposed to be.
But it hasn't worked so far.
It hasn't.
No. Resource control. Once they control their resources. That's not the case now. The case now is that federal government collect all the money the state is making. And that's why recent report shows that 32 states in the federation don't do anything. They just wait for allocation to collect.
Every month.
And so it is that spirit. They also dip their hand into money meant for local government. So remember this day. It's going to be 5 years. It's going to be 10 years. We are going to come back to discuss that it didn't work. Because when we are saying that the public officials are not accountable for it. Governors are not accountable for it. So you see, is it when local government have access to it? Is it when they're going to be accountable for it? It is when the people stand up to ask certain questions and you put your weak institutions in place. So for me, I'm not in support of the autonomy. What I'm in support of is to redesign the political structure.
What would that have looked like?
To have state control their resources. Local government said they needed 57 local government, and they designed and they are funding it. That should be the case with all the states. But that is going to happen when states control their resources.
But when you talk,
we like contradictions, to use contradictions to sort out contradictions in our country. Erosi did the unitary system of government and gave us 12 states. It was not his personal agenda. People have been calling for this. So Erosi just endorsed it. So about Tinubu just came to endorse what the people want. And that is going to be a very, very big complication. We said power on power sector should go to state governor. They didn't pick it up. States don't want to generate life. They just want to collect money at the end of the month and embark on projects that has no direct meaning to the life of in their state, except few states that are upcoming. And that is because resources is coming from somewhere.
But let me ask, because you mentioned Lagos states.
It's going to
muddle the waters.
Yeah, and it's going to inspire call for states, call for local government, which has started.
But it can't work unless they're ready to take it to the National Assembly, because that's what
so what did they take this one to? They take it to the National Assembly too now?
Yes, but the court is there. The Supreme Court is there as the final court of jurisdiction to make legal judgment on certain issues. And that was what was done. It was the Attorney General of the Federation.
What you take to the court, court will sit on its own. Is what you take to the court.
Of course, they only judge on evidence and within the structures that they have.
So court has no blame on this matter.
No, we're not blaming the court.
You, me, my sister here, and all other Nigerians are the one that is presiding over this matter. It's not the court. So, in essence, what I'm saying is that until we have that courage to admit that there's something wrong with this political structure and not looking for the easy way out. The easy way out is what we always want to pass. How can you legislate issues of political challenges? It's not about legislation. It's about redesigning your political structure. The political structure in this country today can't guarantee us prosperity. That's why we are going to look at it. What God has not done for Muhammad and Christ, He can't do it for us. Save and unless that we do the most appropriate thing. Christ carried this cross. Muhammad fought his own jihad.
We should not carry our crosses.
Let's carry our crosses. So we are not willing to do that. So remember this day that you give more power to federal government, with what the federal government has, which is unable to solve the power issue, not Tinubu's administration, all the since 1966 to date. And look at the pattern. We are kept praising the previous government. I give you an example of Lagos. In Lagos, Tinubu was better than Marwa. Fashola was better than Tinubu. Ambode did his own best. Now look at what Sanwo-Olu is doing fantastically well. That's the issue we should be telling about Nigeria too. Previous president governments were always better than the past government, but that's not the case in Nigeria. There's nothing responsible for it other than the structure of the country.
So what about
we can't navigate Nigeria properly, economically, politically, in all spheres of our life properly with this structure, and that's what should be addressing.
So please, I need to interrupt you. What about the caretaker exco parts of things? As we spoke about with Sam Kragbo, the Constitution only recognizes 774 local governments. Yeah. But we have state governors creating LCDAs and caretaker committees, supplementing or supplanting the will of the people. These are not elected individuals. That is supposed to be what is represented at the lowest level for Nigerians is, I want to be able to see my local government chairman because I voted for him. He's easier for me to touch and hold than a governor, a state house representative member, and all above. So in terms of that part of the judgment, these joint accounts where sometimes local governments are saying all the money is together, I'm not feeling my development and I'm looking maybe at another local government and it feels like all the money or all the attention is going to them. How do we, adjudicate that part in this conversation?
First and foremost, I don't want to believe that governors are responsible for the non-performance of local government chairman. What led to why government took that decision, the governors took that decision, was because they were not moving. So government had to design a program for them that this is my road, this is your army contractor. I did the road that federal government allocated and state government allocated to me to clear a drainage. It passed through local government. They didn't do it. They didn't award it. So it came back to
the federal government, the state or federal.
To the state again. So the governor had to compel them that we must have a joint account so that when we have places where your road and my road meets as state and local government, You must be ready at the same time I'm ready to repair it. That was what led to it. It's not because there are some governors who abuse it, though. We should not say that all the governors are this kind of thinking.
Okay.
There are governors who abuse it. So the way to address it now is not to remove and give it to the federal government. There's no model, this model anywhere in the world. And issues that are peculiarities. Federal government don't have capacity to understand it. The peculiarity of each local is the people of it that understand it. For instance, how would you understand the peculiarity in Akwa Ibom, in Safra?
Is that not the same thing they've been saying about?
So it's because we didn't hand over our life back to the people.
Okay.
This is proxy. A president is coming that is going to weaponize the power we are giving him. Okay. A president is coming where he is going to take the charge of the control of 774 local government away from the government.
And these are all
valid
concerns.
That is very close.
These are very, very valid concerns. Just to mention to our audience watching that you can be a part of the conversation. Let us know what your thoughts are. Are you in support of the local government autonomy, or are you against, the court judgment? Let us know. The numbers to call on your TV screen. But Mr. Olokoba, regardless of whether we're in support or whether we're not in support, the Supreme Court has ruled. The Supreme Court has ruled and decided.
In Nigeria.
So how can
when laws are made that is going to create complication for the people, and I'm expert in that line.
Let's try to be positive about it, because the truth is, regardless of what side, Mr. Olokoba, regardless of what side of the divide you are on, there are positives, there are advantages and disadvantages, regardless of what side you are on. But let's try to make the best of what we have.
No, this is emotion.
No, if we have a Supreme Court judgment, everybody needs to align.
To say that it's going to work, and let's hope it's work, it's emotional. You have a headache, take medication.
All right, we will remember this day as you have asked us to.
All right, let's move away from that. Do you have another story you'd like to take?
Oh, okay. Let's take, of course, minimum wage. Tinubu labor talks adjourned to next week. I've been following this story. You had a protest or a strike for a few days. It didn't last a few days.
It was after that shutdown of the national
This is almost a month later. There is no forward movement. If Labour was to call another strike today, do you even think Nigerians would respond?
Is it federal government and Labour? They are CMS twins. To me, they are the same thing.
But hold the
thought. Okay.
So we have Lola from Lagos joining us on the line. Lola, good morning to you.
Good morning, everybody.
Okay, can you help us speak up, please?
Yes, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Everybody. Yes. Let me just quickly chip this in. Irrespective of the fact that we agree or not on the judgment, one thing is clear now. Local government chairmen must be on their toes. Because now the people are going to hold them accountable for every penny and every project. Now there is no excuse of delay or whatsoever. And local government is, the grassroots, they're closer to the people. So now, there's tension in the country. It's another part of the world. Look at what happened in Kenya. So right now, it's not jubilation like, now we're in control. It's now you have to be ready to be accountable. There is no excuse anymore. The people are watching, and they're watching closely. So we're going to see what they're going to do with this new power given unto them. I pray that they do the right thing so they don't cause problems in the society. Thank you.
If we had Mr. Olokoba respond to that, we'll go back to local governments.
Exactly.
But let's pick up on minimum wage.
I said they are same twins. The pattern has always been the same thing. I took part in numerous protests. Wage increase in fuel hike. And our concern is that the moment we increase salary,
everything
goes up, and you further decimate the economic life of Nigerian workers. What we have to do, it's not my statistics. The statistics from National Bureau of Statistics says that over 70% of Nigerians seek for unconventional means to add to their salary every month. That means they need intervention.
It's not a living wage.
To done. Not only about the wage, about prices of commodities.
Yes.
And this concern, we raise it with Labour. That do you want your people to suffer the fate that we've been going through in the last since 1990? Don't let us go back to military era. And they are not bothered about that, which means they are only bothered about the Shakeup dues, the deduction from salaries of the workers, which is also going to increase. That's what I do about that. That's my interpretation of it. Because you are not going to hold the prices of commodities down. So what you need to do is to create a template, a rooftop for prices of commodities, and look at the landing cost of all the essential goods in our life, production, sort it out. That's when you are going to be able to determine what should be the minimum wage, what should be the salary of a worker. And I keep saying it, there are outrageous rent increases in all parts of the country that you wonder why people will collect 1 million for 3-bedroom flat.
In fact, this thing you have said is a very valid point, because I'm house hunting and I feel the pinch. But hold on.
Why will okay?
Just hold on. Let's take this call from Abuja. Good morning, and thank you very much for calling.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, Chris.
This is Chris Daniel. I'm calling from Abuja.
All right, thank you, Chris. Please go ahead.
Yes, regarding the landmark judgment yesterday by Supreme Court, I clearly understand what your president is saying. In fact, I even understand beyond what he's presenting. It's not just about having financial autonomy to the local government. It's beyond that. There are better options, which is what he's saying. Restructuring. Let states control the resources. This brings even government closer to the people. And besides, this also negates the issue of federalism, the concept of federalism between the federal government and the federating states. The local government is supposed to be a developmental instrument in the hands of the states. Imagine a situation whereby the state control their resources and then using their local governments to develop. I mean, it becomes competitive among the states, just as we had it in the First Republic. So, I mean, if we can do this line, I mean, we get what we want. That's my take. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. And that sort of aligns with the call by the former governor of Delta State, James Ibori, that he hopes there will be a review of the judgments. But I still don't want us to go back there.
Yeah,
let's quickly wrap on this labor conversation so we can move on.
So there must be a mechanism that must be put in place where price of commodities will not rise. All the road that led to farmland in all the states, the labor needs to talk to governors that you are embarking on white elephant projects.
International airports.
The people are hungry. That's what keeps prices of commodities going up. And the rent, landlords have a concern that the porous agreement between landlord and the tenant is the reason why people are moving away from tenancy, renting their house out. It's not because houses are not available, but people are converting their premises to another business venture because the design for payment scheme in Nigeria, which is 1 year, is cumbersome. To pay every year is cumbersome. So people indulge and may not end up paying on time. So I can't be running after people. How many property do you have? That's the concern for Nigeria. And that's why labor needs to look into them. Transportation. What's the subsidy on it?
Health.
What's the health? So all these issues are things that labor should be bothered about. And the federal government need to tell labor that go and sort out those issues first before they come to me.
Okay.
The federal government didn't do that. They just felt that once labor comes to the stop, just offer them something. Instead of designing and also reminding them their own role too.
All right.
There's a role of the labor and the civil society and the rest of Nigeria and other agencies to look at how the life of workers will be better, not only on wages only.
So please, let's hold that thought. We have Tony from Benue joining us on the phone now. Hi, Tony. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Go ahead.
Okay, I want to comment on local government autonomy. I think this is the biggest gift that President Tinubu has given to Nigeria. Because so many presidents came before and they fought it and they couldn't fight the fight. I think I recommend Tinubu did well. He did well. And for my brother in the studio, I didn't agree with him for one reason. We have tried the state governor handling these things since 1999 up to date, and it didn't work. Go to some, like in multiple local government where I'm residing in Benue State. Come to the secretariat and see how secretariat of a local government that have existed since 1970 up to date. Go to the secretariat and see how dilapidated it is. Let us try this one and see how it will work. We are not going to leave that. Already we know that 20% of the allocation is coming to the local government. We are not going to sit and look them sharing the money as usual. It is not going to be like. Let us try it and see how it will work.
Very much, Tony, for calling.
Thank you, Tony.
There's some people would argue that there's some sense to that, and Sanity is said to be doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
The reason why local government funds have been taken away from them is because governors are not responsible for their welfare, so they take the money away from them. The caller before him said that the component part of a country is what takes charge of local government, not the federal government.
Okay.
Let each state design the model. It didn't work since 1990 because of the way we structure Nigeria, and it's not likely to work. How many times have you still taken his governors up in the Benue State?
Okay.
It's 32 local government I want to take up.
I want us to quickly take this story on the front page of the Punch newspaper as well, talking about 33 billion naira fraud, ex-power minister collapses before trial, remanded in prison. And, you know, this is a story that is very important because whilst some would argue that he could be unwell, there are others that would probably argue that it was a gimmick. Just to run through it.
It has become a pattern. But there's no how such a money will be in someone's hand and it will be LD.
Let me read
33 billion naira.
Let's read out some of the allegations here. We're seeing that the charges against Seller Maman conspiring with officials at the Ministry of Power and private companies to indirectly convert 33.8 billion naira meant for the Zungeru and Mambila hydroelectric power projects, aiding and abetting Samson Beatrice to make a cash payment of $655,700 without going through a financial institution. Alleged involvement in 22 billion naira fraud, acquiring property in Nigeria and overseas allegedly linked to the diverted funds, laundering millions of nairas and dollars.
He said it, that there's no way 33 billion.
You can't be in possession of this kind of money and you'll be early because all this acquisition, by the time you start monitoring where you hide them, it gives you a headache. So they develop all this complication truly. And when you want to go and call to come and account for it, there's no how your BP will not go up. So my advice is clear on this. Too much money in the hand of federal government. That's why individuals like him have access to.
And then this then comes back to the local government.
Come back to restructuring. Okay. Let states control their resources. Give federal government limited responsibility.
All right.
Currency control, immigration, security, defense, and issues like that. But when you collect the money meant for the entire nation, it will keep falling into hands of individuals. And they keep mismanaging it.
I mean, you've talked about restructuring for the longest time. I don't think we can exhaust that conversation today. Mr. Lokova, thank you so much for joining us here. It's always great to have you. So much. We have more conversations to look at this morning, and we're heading to them right after this break. Welcome back. The House of Representatives Committee probing the arbitrary increase in the price of cement earlier this week threatened to arrest the management of Dangote Cement if it fails to appear at its next hearing. Now, some of the country's cement manufacturers have failed to honor invitations from the Joint Committee probing arbitrary increase in the price of cement.
Now, meanwhile, President of the Dangote Group Industries Limited, Alhaji Aliko Dangote, while giving a keynote address, criticized the economic policies of the CBN, stating that no economic growth will occur as employment opportunities will decline following the new 30% interest rate. This has led economic experts to juxtapose the sudden inflation of cement prices, just like every other inflated commodity prices, to the recent policies affecting the economy. Joining us to look at this now, at how Africa's richest man, Aliko Dangote, has lent his voice similar to the sound of the masses, and how the hardship is crippling progress, is public affairs analyst Ayo Adio. Ayo, welcome. I know you're a friend of the family. You're meeting me for the first time.
I was a bit worried when I saw that Dangote too was complaining. If they say Dangote wasted, they find money can complain. Who are the, what is the fate of the masses?
Serious issues.
Serious issues. So let's look at the current cost of cement in Nigeria. So Dangote cement price is about 10,000 naira to about 14,000 naira per bag. You have Lafarge Africa PLC running at about 12,000 to 14,000 naira per bag. Boa Cement about 10,000 to 11,000 naira per bag. And in late 2023, cement was sold between 3,500 to 5,000 naira per bag. So when you look at the inflation of what the price per bag was last year to now, and you see how it is basically, what is that? I'm not good at math. I can only count money. So somebody will help me out.
The rise is astronomical.
It's impossible to reckon with.
I think that we're playing the ostrich here, and not just I think the National Assembly is playing the ostrich, right? Food inflation is at 40%. Headline inflation is well over 30%, highest since 1996. So you have a high inflationary environment where the cost of every single commodity, household item has hit the roof. If you're buying an egg that used to cost about 50 or 60 naira a year or two ago is now close to 200 naira. And a loaf of bread has tripled in price. You have a lot of bakeries that are now shutting their offices. So to imagine or to assume that in this high inflationary environment, energy costs that are hiking, infrastructure has not been pretty decent, and you expect the cost of cement to remain on the floor, I think it's a bit of wishful thinking. The cost of production is unbelievably high in Nigeria, and it makes it difficult for manufacturers to survive. And the fact that his name is Dangote doesn't make him immune from some of these challenges that many manufacturers are grappling. And just a bit of data, if you looked at the reports from the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria some 3 months ago, they claim that over 700 small manufacturing businesses have shut down, and largely because of a difficult environment to do business. You know as well that over 13 multinationals have had to shut offices and leave the country, all of them pointing fingers to how difficult it is to do business in Nigeria. So it's impossible to have inflation at over 30%, to have high energy costs. I'm not sure what you're going to be producing and be profitable if you're buying diesel at over 1,000 naira per diesel. That's why you see so many hospitality businesses are going under. There's a huge and a major hospitality business somewhere in Victoria Island as we speak today that posted a loss of over 10 billion yesterday. So it's almost impossible to imagine that people are going to do business in this kind of environment and be profitable without having to deal with higher costs, and takes a bit of their magics at the end of the day. So for me, I think the debate, especially from the National Assembly, has to move away from summoning Dangote and other cement manufacturers to have a shouting match about why the price of cement is going up, or to bully. The last time it was, I think it was MultiChoice that they were bullying while they were trying to review prices. The debate has to move from those reductionist conversations into using their tools as legislators to stimulate this economy and gear it towards productivity, growth, and to create jobs for the economy.
And the reductionist conversations will be very welcome if they're looking at, the administration, the government itself, being able to lead by example. Exactly. Yes. We're not seeing them reducing the cost of governance. Rather, it's getting larger.
So the point, it's not even about, that's also an elephant in the room, reducing the cost of governance. But Nigerian legislators do not seem to understand the tools that they have in their disposal. And I give you a typical example. When Biden came into office, America was just recovering from COVID. Inflation was record high because of the crisis in Ukraine and Russia. What did they do? They passed 3 landmark legislation, the Infrastructure Bill, the Chips and Science Act, and of course they passed the Inflation Reduction Act. And what did these 3 things? They put 2 trillion into the economy. And what did that money do? They put 400 billion into the production of renewable energies for countries who wanted to manufacture semiconductors, and all of that. They gave tax credits to manufacturing companies to relocate from everywhere they were doing business in the world back to the United States of America. And those bills have produced 13 million jobs in 3 years.
And brought down inflation.
And has brought down inflation. So you have legislative tools that you can use to deal with the challenges that we're facing. But it seems to me like our National Assembly are just good at giving motions every other market day and not seem to realize the tools that they have in their disposal.
Is it that they're unaware or they're intentionally not exploring options?
I also wonder, is it a case of a distraction? They want to be seen to be working. Dangote is a very high figure for you to call and say, come and sit down before us and explain yourself.
To be honest, I don't have a problem with you summoning Dangote to explain whatever you want. I mean, it's the National Assembly. You have the powers to summon whoever in the country to appear before you. I think my grouse is, you haven't done your jobs. I'd like you to tell me one single bill that the National Assembly has passed in support of manufacturing in Nigeria. Just one single bill. I mean, I cannot emphasize the challenges that businesses are grappling with. And not a single legislative tool has been used to cushion the effect of these challenges on businesses across the country. So you cannot just sit down in your seats, earning large sitting allowances, wardrobe allowances, and all of that,
allowances,
buying brand new SUVs, and then you are summoning people left, right, and center when you haven't done the job of trying to nudge the economy in the right direction. And again, I think people just assume that our bills, when we pass bills in the country, it's time for largesse. People want to get contracts and things like that. And that's perhaps where we are as a country. Because your bills or your budgets are supposed to be targeted instruments at stimulating the growth and solving problems in your economy.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, if you looked at our budget, it's full of white elephant projects, misplaced priorities, contracts that are overinflated, and it's absolutely not targeted at driving productivity and growth. Now, until they do their jobs, you can't continue to haggle or hassle or harass Nigerians who are crumbling under this weight of the macroeconomic fundamentals that are crumbling many businesses in Nigeria.
So I need to ask, because this is not the first time the National Assembly, be it whatever chamber, will ask somebody and invite them to come and sit before them. And I want to ask this in terms of the respect that people even have for the National Assembly. Dangote is not the only person who's been invited. They've asked other large cement maker representatives to come. They're now saying that they might issue arrest warrants if he doesn't show. People don't show up. Ministers don't show up.
Yeah.
What do you think that says, in fact, about how we hold this particular chamber in esteem? Regardless of the individuals who come in every time there's election, we seem to have lost all due respect for this part.
It's sad because, I'm not one to defend you evading summons of the National Assembly, but it tells you that they have lost their reckoning. They're supposed to be the chamber of justice. They're supposed to represent the Nigerian people. But unfortunately, it seems that there is a huge gap between their realities and the realities of the average Nigerian. And perhaps that explains why they are not accorded the kind of respect that they should be accorded. And that hurts me because I'd like to see a National Assembly that exudes that kind of respect, that once it issues summons, people are scrambling to appear before many of these committees. But unfortunately, because they are not doing their jobs, because many of them are asleep at the switch. They just simply do whatever, they are told. It just hurts me that they just don't recognize the tools at their disposal to nudge our economy in the direction that it should go. And so everybody in the country have suddenly let the job of fixing our macroeconomic fundamentals with the CBN Governor, Cardoso. Unfortunately, as a CBN Governor, you have very limited tools to deal with the issues that we're grappling. And unfortunately, his focus now, obviously, is to stop hot capital from leaving Nigeria.
Right.
And that's why he has continued to keep interest rates high, because the people on the fiscal side, to put it mildly, have been asleep on the switch.
Okay, we'll talk about how the role the citizens have to play in holding our lawmakers to account. But I want to paint a picture of what the reality of this is. Since we started the conversation with Cement and Dangote, I went to check a few houses yesterday. And I know that the mainland and the island have different pricing. Let me give you a current reality of what houses somewhere in the Ikate axis go for. 2-bedroom apartment goes for, the cheapest I saw was 4.5 million. And the 3-bedroom apartment goes for 7 million. I'm talking rent only.
But also, are they new constructions?
Some of them are new constructions. Okay. Some of them are old, old properties, right? But we're not talking agency, agreement, legal caution. Even worse is, even the seeming new constructions, there's some that you can see that the finishing is poorly done. So what we're going to see is there's a high cost of cement. Right now, people are going to try to make ends meet by cutting corners, using substandard products. We're going to see more building collapses, unfortunately, because people would then resort to substandard products. What is the projection for the future? What hope do we have? Because the truth is, even as I was saying this and being alarmed, they were saying if you don't move now, by next year, it's going to be worse. You will not be able to afford it next year if you don't move now.
So, again, it comes back to the absence of an interventionist state. And that's the problem that we're having. And I like the example that you gave, that housing costs are getting out of control. Unfortunately, if this was any other major democracy in the world, two things would have happened. the state would have intervened. And it will not have intervened simply by clamping down on housing owners to reduce their prices. What it would simply have done was to intervene with social housing schemes. It's almost unbelievable that we live in a country today where many state governments do not understand the importance of social housing. We're not building houses. I read an interesting article where somebody said, you're living in your grandfather's house that was built by Jakonde, that you are now willing to sell, to make ends meet today. Most of the social housing was built during Jakonde and Shagari time. Governors don't build social housing again. So how are you going to bridge the supply gap in the market when government is not intervening in providing social housing or affordable, housing? There are other ways to also deal with all of these ridiculous price increases. You have rent controls in certain countries in the world where governments levy huge taxes on luxury estates and use the funding from those taxes to supply, cheap housing. Sometimes there are certain legislations that say that if you're going to erect, for instance, some of these high towers you see in Ikoyi where they stretch about 22 floors, the government is going to take 2 floors and use it for social housing and provide, cheaper rents for middle class or low income families that want to use. The problem still goes back to the fact that you lack an interventionist state without welfareist programs.
So how can we hold them to account as quickly as possible?
And also, how close are we to this quote-unquote revolt that the National Assembly, that the lower chamber seems to be concerned about?
To be honest, I just don't know how you're going to hold them to account without changing the political class. Right. Because it just appears to me that the current political class do not seem, they're so distant from the realities of the average Nigerian. And until we have a new political elite that understand the role of government in intervening, especially in times, as this, then we're always going to be grappling with, we'll keep creating unemployment and poverty, the economy keeps tanking, and it's just sad that we've lost 1 decade. Every macroeconomic fundamental points in the direction that we're going to lose another decade if things do not change fundamentally.
All right. Thank you so much, Ayo Adio. Not a lot of good and cheery news on what is looking like also a very dreary day as well.
Right, interesting. Very, very, very sad. Well, as we wrap up with Ayo Adio here, we're going to share our top story for the week. So many stories. I think, Tolu, what would you say is your top story? The Women Affairs Ministry?
That was, so when I heard about it, I had not yet seen the video. When I went to see the video, I now realized what everybody was talking about. The bickering was insane. And I often wonder why we always seem to have such strong bones for ourselves, sometimes that we do not have for the men in the same position.
Right. Well, my top story would be the NSAS judgment and how the ECOWAS Court of Justice has ruled that the federal government was in flagrant violation of the fundamental human rights of, young Nigerians. And it's a win for the young Nigerians. Beyond what the court has said, I'm hoping that in some measure, and I say in some measure because I know that the people who have been affected can never get their lives back. Lives were lost. There are people who don't.
There's still people supposedly in court.
Yes,
or in jail.
In
rather,
jail, rather.
In detention.
Yeah, exactly. DJ Switch is allegedly not in the country anymore, as she's
afraid for her life.
Afraid for her life. So I'm hoping that they can be reintegrated back into the society because they did not do anything wrong. They were fighting, like DJ Switch, for example. What wrong did she do? Showing us with her phone what exactly was happening in real time to a government that gaslit us to think that at a point I began to imagine, was I imagining it? Did I not see it? Was I not hearing the bullets? It was the worst form of gaslighting ever. And one day I'm hoping we can have a conversation analyzing the NSAS protest and the protest in Kenya and see what happened, what differences, because as in Nigeria, they didn't seem to get the desired results.
Effects, yeah.
But the one in Kenya got the result that they wanted to an extent.
So that means I'm actually going to change my top story. My top story is going to go to young Kenyans, like an award for you, because also the inspiration that it has given young Africans. This is the continent with the youngest population in the world. So many are out of school, so many are unemployed, so many will graduate and they don't have hope. We think about Japa only almost as a Nigerian conversation. Japa is happening across the continent. We're losing the best, the brightest. We're losing our future because of a lack of interventionist policies, a lack of people at the highest offices understanding what the future needs, what the present needs and what the future needs as well. And so William Ruto has conceded a lot. He has conceded a lot. And I hope that young people across the continent see that and they're somehow inspired. And I think the African youth population will be all right.
And that is where we draw the curtain on today's show. Thank you so much for joining us all through the week. We'll be back again next week, Monday. Ayo Adio, thank you for joining us. Hopefully when next week we'll have
There's some cheery news.
We'll see you next week. I'm Olive, MOD.
And sitting in for whoever I'm sitting in for today, my name is Tolulokwe Adela Balogun. Join me with the ladies of Jasiri at 10 a.m. for all the hot topics. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.